It's a December night in Havana, Cuba, 2016, and a diplomat from the United States goes outside his new home to enjoy the cool night air, cool at least by Havana standards, in this tropical paradise. Along with his wife and a few others, they are among the first American diplomats to be in Cuba since the 1950s. There's hope in the air that the United States and Cuba can finally settle their differences and restore diplomatic ties. But among the nighttime air rises a sound that cuts through the otherwise peaceful night. This strange sound will occur over and over again in the next few days and will be heard by multiple U.S. officials in Havana. In the following weeks, 22 American officials and 8 Canadian officials will come down with symptoms of concussion associated with this sound. These include, but are not limited to, dizziness, vertigo, blurred vision, severe headaches, nausea, tinnitus, and even hearing loss. This strange illness will not only affect these individuals, but will come to affect hundreds of other members of the U.S. security and intelligence services around the world. The cause of this illness is still unknown, but there are potential explanations and theories that we will explore. This first incident in Cuba, though, will give a name to this strange phenomenon, as it will come to be known as Havana Syndrome. I'm Matthew Thompson, your host, and this is the first episode of Tales of the Unknown. Originally, the leadership of the U.S. Embassy in Havana did not think the strange noises were more than the normal harassment diplomats experience from locals or the Cuban government. From time to time, diplomats would come home to find their TVs turned on to state propaganda or have dog's feces smeared on their doorknobs of their homes and cars, or random windows open. However, these incidents became less frequent in late 2016. Leadership of the embassy initially kept the reports of strange noises and severe symptoms to themselves and did not inform the wider embassy staff. They decided to send those first victims affected to be medically evaluated in Miami. Then in February, one of the diplomats' wives had reported hearing the same sound as the other diplomats. But when she heard the sound, she went to investigate. And as soon as she got to the window where the sound had seemingly come from, she saw a van speed away from the home. After this incident, the American diplomatic leadership met with the Cuban authorities to report what had been happening. The Cuban authorities, in response, bolstered security for American diplomats and even allowed the FBI to do their own investigation. Initially, American leadership thought the Cuban government could have been responsible for the occurrences, but their cooperation proved that they were likely not culpable. The same diplomat that first heard the strange noise in December came into work one day in March. He had felt just fine. His friend and co-worker, however, had just returned from Miami. The co-worker in question was a fit young man in his 30s. So it's a surprise when the coworker reveals that he was treated in Miami for what doctors have told him was serious hearing loss. He had suffered severe damage to his ear bone, and he told his friend that he would be leaving the island and not returning to Cuba. He had reported one incident of hearing the strange noise where it seemed to be directed at him, and he felt a sharp pain in his ear. Following that night, he had recurring headaches and hearing problems. The diplomat, concerned after hearing his friend had suffered such pain from a strange noise, went on to confront the leadership of the embassy and demanded that they let others know. On the following day, March 29th, Ambassador Jeffrey De Laurentiis assembled all the staff who had security clearance and told them about the reports of the strange sound and symptoms. He urged anyone to come forward if they thought that they had any information or were affected, and to tell no one outside the embassy about the situation. But for many, this was the first time they had heard about the incidents and were fearful for what could happen to their families. In April 2017, over 80 diplomats at the U.S. Embassy in Havana went to seek medical evaluation, and a third of them would be found having suffered some of the symptoms associated with what was now being called Havana Syndrome. Here, one of the first victims of Havana Syndrome, Tina Onifer, describes the incident that happened to her.
The kids were upstairs playing, and I was standing at the kitchen window, and all of a sudden I felt like I was being struck with something. It was gripping. It was like I had been seized by some invisible hand, and I couldn't move.
The sound that the diplomats had all commonly heard associated with Havana Syndrome had actually been recorded. Until now, I have not used the actual sound associated with Havana Syndrome out of caution, but with fair warning, I will now share what they all heard. Havana was not the only place that these auditory-induced illnesses were happening. Some 1,500 American officials around the world have experienced symptoms of Havana Syndrome, including severe symptoms such as brain damage. One incident occurred right outside of the White House when Pentagon staffer Olivia Troy had become suddenly faint after hearing a sharp noise hitting one side of her head. As recently as 2021, Vice President Kamala Harris could not visit the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam, for over 3 hours because there were several reports of anomalous health incidents similar to that of Havana Syndrome. What could be the source of these mysterious illnesses affecting diplomats worldwide? Could they be the result of an attack on the U.S. by a new unknown weapon? Or could it be something no one had even expected? Well, we'll find out after we return from these messages. Yes?
Hi, are you going to pay your rent this month?
I'm kind of in the middle of a podcast right now. So if you could, I don't know, come back later.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to pay it, because if you don't, I'm going to raise it.
What?
Yes, that's right. In Section 5, Clause 3 of your contract, it says that if you don't pay your rent on time, I can raise it for the next month.
I don't even think that's legal.
Well, I think it is.
I think I'm going to have to consult a lawyer.
And I think I'm going to have to get lunch, because I'm hungry.
Well, thankfully, there's a place for both of us. At Babish, Babish, and Rotisserie. You see, Babish, Babish, and Rotisserie have been in the law business for over 50 years.
And in the rotisserie chicken business for a little over 12.
Are you hungry for justice and a chicken leg? Then call 1-800-CHICKEN.
Again, that's 1-800-CHICKEN.
See you in court and in the food booth. There are many theories for what the actual source of Havana Syndrome is. One popular theory is that it is the result of a new auditory weapon held by a foreign power that can directly target individuals. The foreign power most likely to have this weapon and carry out these attacks is Russia. Many intelligence reports do not rule out this possibility, and one State Department report that came from a panel of medical experts said that the symptoms experienced by those in Havana came from a non-natural source. In fact, in April 2012, the Russian defense minister announced a 10-year military plan that included the development of directed energy and cytronics weapons that would attack the central nervous system of its victims. If Russia is behind some sort of new weapon that targets American diplomats, it would not be the first time the Russians have done such a thing. During the 1950s and 70s, the American embassy in the Soviet Union in Moscow at the time would unknowingly be bombarded with microwaves in what has become known as Moscow signal. Soviets are believed to have done this to activate listening devices within the embassy or to disrupt American listening devices and signals in order to protect sensitive Russian information. The U.S. Embassy staff that was subject to the bombardment for years did not know until it was revealed in the 1970s. After that, many of them had reported symptoms such as recurring headaches, fatigue, and a loss of concentration. Many of the former staff would later also be diagnosed with cancer. The U.S. government knew that the Soviets were targeting the embassy with microwaves, but scientific consensus at the time affirmed that it was not dangerous, which is why they did not initially inform the embassy staff. In 2020, a report by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine suggested that some of the symptoms experienced by those suffering from Havana Syndrome could be linked to microwaves, similar to that of Moscow signal. Another prominent theory is that Havana Syndrome is the result of an MPI among the national security community. An MPI is an abbreviation for mass psychogenic illness, also commonly known as mass hysteria. This social phenomenon is the result of high anxiety around a perceived threat against a social group that can cause an array of physical symptoms, similar to that of known diseases, without any known cause. A prominent example of this occurred in 2006 when a TV show aired in Portugal that showed a completely fictional illness, but after it aired, numerous young people across the country experienced similar symptoms to that of the fictional illness. Many have discounted this last theory as it seems disrespectful to the victims of Havana Syndrome to suggest they are making it up. This is due to ignorance about what MPI actually is. Victims of MPI experience real symptoms, but their cause is not as evident as they may assume. There are many clues in this case of Havana Syndrome that MPI is the culprit. For example, the sound that was captured and identified by multiple staff of the U.S. Embassy was found to be the call of a Cuban cicada. Not the sound of a foreign auditory weapon. The symptoms are real. The same State Department report that found that the symptoms could be caused by a non-natural source also admitted that some of the symptoms are the result of viral illnesses, past head trauma, aging, and even stress. MPIs are known to happen in highly stressful environments. It is one of the key conditions for them to occur. And what could be more highly stressful job or environment than that of international diplomacy or defense? The severity of the brain injuries suffered by some of the first victims have also come into question. A report published by the National Institute of Health showed that MRI scans of severe cases of Havana Syndrome victims had no detectable brain injury when compared to a control group. There are other prominent reasons to believe MPI is the culprit. One such reason is the U.S. government has not released reports that have found MPI to at least be partly responsible for Havana Syndrome. In fact, in 2021, a member of a government panel was forced to resign over their view that they could not rule out MPI playing some role. In another separate incident, an expert on MPI was removed from a panel investigating the causes of Havana Syndrome. And as recently as 2024, the National Institute of Health canceled all future research on Havana Syndrome, citing concerns of coercion among its participants. They were potentially coerced by government agencies such as the CIA to participate in the studies. I believe MPI is the most likely culprit based on the available evidence. This is not to say, however, that what U.S. diplomats have experienced or are experiencing is completely fictional. MPI is a real illness with real consequences, even if it is one day found that MPI or mass psychogenic illness is the culprit behind Havana Syndrome. The real symptoms the diplomats faced were the result of a high-stress environment among defense and diplomatic communities, and shouldn't be dismissed, as is attested to in Tina Onifer's case.
It's not easy to talk about our health because it's an invisible injury. It's 4.5 years of excruciating headaches. It's 4.5 years of stumbling, losing my balance, 4.5 years of vision degradation.
People don't understand what this kind of brain damage can do to you. It's very easy for people to be dismissive and say, but you look fine. But the reality is I'm not. And I don't think very many of us are. And we just want to have our lives back.
This has been Tales of the Unknown. Thank you for embarking on this mystery with me. As we've seen from this, the world is a strange place, full of strange phenomenon and sometimes even stranger explanations. Follow the podcast and stay tuned for the next tale of the unexplainable, unidentifiable, unknown.